Welcome to the Motogp Xtra podcast.
So our first stop on our Asian tour brings us to the island of Lombok in Indonesia. Mandalika is one of the most recent additions to the calendar, and it's also a track that adds many different challenges for the MotoGP calendar. Before we get into the race weekend, we have a bit of news that came out after the weekend, but we're going to talk about it before the weekend because magic. So KTM have announced at the end of the year Guidotti, their team manager that he signed from Pramac 2 years ago, Rhys, at this point, I think. He had 2 seasons at the top, or was he 1 year?
Yeah, I think so. Did he come? He came the year before Miller, didn't he? So
yeah, so
did he come the year?
Two and a bit years anyway. He's been there a few years.
I think he's still had
anyway.
a year on his contract anyway, I think. So.
And basically, end of the year, he is pastures new. At first, I wasn't sure if he was being maybe moved aside into a different role, but apparently Honda HRC want him in some sort of fashion for a role. That's apparently what the rumours are, but it is very heavily rumoured. First we had Danny Pedrosa would be the new team leader, my team manager, whatever you want to call him, at KTM. I don't believe that, as it looks very likely Aki Ayo. Rhys, what do you make of all this developments on Sunday evening?
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense with it being Aki Ayo, because we'd obviously heard about it being Pedrosa, and it kind of that'd be cool, but also seems a bit weird and almost seems counterintuitive since he's lead of the development of the bike, so you kind of take his attention away from that, considering that's where their problem currently lies. It's I don't know how that's really going to help things, is it? So it makes more sense to have Aki Ayo, but I mean, I don't see why getting rid of Guidotti really is going to help them. I mean, obviously, if Guidotti's going off to Honda, then that's fair enough. But it sounds like he's kind of been pushed, and then obviously that's kind of where he's just going to go to next. He's obviously going to look for his next job in the paddock. But it doesn't really make any sense to me. Obviously, Aki Ayo, great team manager, great team leader. We know this. We've seen over the years in the junior categories. If you look at the records, it's filled with Aki Ayo team wins, Aspar team wins. He's up there with those kind of legendary teams. So we've seen him win Moto3 championships plenty of times, Moto2 championships plenty of times as well. So clearly, in fact, when was the last time they didn't win a Moto2 championship? That's probably the better question. They've won obviously they won with Gardner, they won with Fernandez, they've won with Acosta, and they won with Zarco a couple of times previously to that as well. So clearly a man that knows what he's doing. He picks out talent very well as well. Obviously, we've seen the likes of Acosta coming through, Brad Binder as well, Oliveira, plenty of other riders that have come through that whole sort of IO Motorsports, Red Bull, KTM scheme. So clearly they obviously hold Aki in a very high position, and rightly so. And I think he'll do a good job, but I don't think it's going to change anything for KTM, because I don't think their problem is the team management. It's that the bike isn't very good, and that 2 of the riders are also not very good. So, yeah. I don't think if they suddenly start performing next year, it's because they've hired some new riders rather than the fact that they've hired a new team manager, in my opinion.
For me, this year, especially all the build up towards this season last year, KTM had a special bike coming. They felt like that the gap between Ducati, especially with kind of all the other manufacturers, KTM almost have covered, bar maybe Aprilia on their day. I felt like KTM really thought that it would be, they'd close that gap so that they'd be level with them most weeks, and then the odd weekend, a Mugello, for example, Ducati would have them covered maybe. But it seemingly, I think, to be honest, never mind the bike, I think just the change in rear tyre this year has cost the GP23s and seemingly the KTMs, because it's seemingly this year that their current bike doesn't really work with it, and all riders seemingly struggle, other than Acosta, who came onto it, he knew no difference. So that kind of just gives a level playing field to him, because he doesn't really know what it was before. But I suppose when a team isn't doing well, they have aspirations of doing what Ducati is now, where their before bikes are in the grid and they are the top 4 positions. But yeah, I do agree that they have a couple of riders that aren't good enough at the moment, and I think next year it's going to get better anyway, because they're going to have 2 championship level riders in their full factory team, as well as 2 Grand Prix winners and 2 world champions in their own right in their second team, even though it's classed as 2 factory teams. But there's no such thing ever will happen in a top level sport, that you'll have 2 equal factory teams. One will always suffer. So the Tech 3 team again next year will be their sister team and their lesser team, but still with the caliber rider they have in there, it will be good to see. But it'll be interesting to see, because Aki isn't 100% confirmed yet, but his links with KTM and with Red Bull for many years have been there, and it would be the logical decision. So, starting off the race weekend, we are going, of course, as always, to Moto3 now. Moto3 at Mandalika can be one of those race weekends that it's a bit tricky. It's a flowing track, but a very narrow racing line. And the flowing racing lines of the Moto3 boys always end up putting each other really far off track. And we saw a lot of actual front end saves. Piqueras, for example, made a very good save in, I believe, turn 10, I think, or turn 8. But just throughout the whole weekend, track probably isn't as dirty as we had before. But you can see from the helicopter shots and from any basic aerial shots, there's a very distinctive racing line. Now, Rhys, with it being a flowing track, was it a surprise that we ended up getting, at the start of the race, a pretty big group of 10 riders?
No, not really, because this is kind of how the last 2 races at this circuit played out from memory. That, like, even though you kind of look at some of those sections, you think, oh, that's flowing, and that might maybe break up the group, because a lot of the passes are obviously dive bombs and things like that, so if people are putting hard dive bomb kind of passes, the other guys in front could flow through the corners a little bit better and pull away. But a lot of it, because it's so fast, they are just constantly slipstreaming each other, so they just keep together. And yeah, like we said sort of with Mazzano as well, where some of the high speed corners, they're pretty much just slipstreaming and keeping together. Same kind of thing here, some sort of long straights as well. Obviously, like you say, because the fact that it's difficult to pass, I think also stops them from doing quite as many overtakes, which always keeps the group more together, because there's not as many people sort of running wide and stuff like that. But it was a little bit better this year in that aspect, because the racing line was a bit wider than last year. You know, still not amazing, but the track condition overall seemed quite heavily improved over previous seasons, which was good to see. So it meant we actually got a little bit better races. Obviously, Moto3 especially, because the bikes and the tyres are so narrow, they can probably get maybe 2 riders in the racing line and actually be able to pull passes a bit more. So there perhaps was a little bit more of the dive bomb overtakes this year than last year, but at the same time, when they did happen, they weren't running onto the dirty part of the track, so it wasn't breaking the pack up. So yeah, pretty much as you'd expect. That's why they were kind of all together, just all the combinations really, you know, obviously kind of the racing line being narrow, so it's kind of just puts you off maybe making that pass, because you could run wide, but then the ones that did do it wasn't as bad as previous years. Then you got all the flowing corners keeping them together. So yeah, I think it kind of fully made sense that they were keeping that pack together. And to be honest, we have seen it the last few rounds a little bit more. Last couple of seasons, we've seen maybe a couple of guys get away and pull away, but you know, Mazzano 1 especially was quite a big group, and sorry, Mazzano 2 was a bigger group, wasn't it? Mazzano 1 was the one where they pulled away a little bit more, and we have seen that perhaps a little bit more this season, that they have stuck together. So I think maybe the Pirellis are having some sort of impact on that as well, and making it harder for those guys to pull away out front, because tyre wear is now somewhat of a concern.
Yeah, and you do mention here Pirellis. I was quite interested coming into Moto 3 and Moto 2 going to this track, just because extreme temperatures, not the most ideal track conditions. So it is a real test for Pirelli. Obviously, they've been there before with World Superbike, so they would have had some data, but for Moto 3, it's still good to see how they got on. And to be honest, it wasn't as dramatic. I thought the drop off would be worse, but as we got down to the last 4 or 5 laps, the group of riders still seemed to have plenty of rubber underneath for a usual part of the race. Now, you did mention there, very flowing track. It just, I think for me, it led to not many overtaking spots. So a lot of the track is very flowy. If you think of the first sector, it's a bit stop start, then you have a very fast left right sector, then you have a bit of a dive, then you have kind of an S bend. Again, it's quite flowing. You can kind of set something off, but you have to go off the racing line, which is such a dangerous maneuver in these conditions. And again, the last sector, so fast, but again, you have to, one of those corners where you open it out to get the run through it, to go up the inside, you're going onto the dirty track. So for me, as I was watching it, I was kind of looking, going, like, they can't really pass there, and I go, it's a huge risk to pass there, and I go, so you're kind of then think to yourself, there's only 3, 4, 5 at most good overtaking chances, as well as a lot of slipstreaming, so the gaps don't grow. So I was expecting a different race, but in fairness, we ended up getting one of those races where a couple of people got long laps, opened up the group as the race went on, but we still got to the end of the race with a couple. Now, of course, one guy unfortunately didn't make the end of the race, and he was the first guy that just started to turn the screw for me, and it was Colin Vire, and unfortunately he had a very fast crash through the second sector. Rhys, it was one of those crashes where he just rolls the front hooks, upsets the rear, and he crashes quite hard. Thankfully, he looked okay afterwards, but unfortunately for Vire, who's leading and looking really strong, it just looked like he was just wanting to turn the temperature on this race up a little bit. Unfortunately, it just shows, again, when you kind of maybe just push a Pirelli in extreme heats, maybe not the best tyre.
Yeah, it's one of those things. He obviously was at the front, and like we said, obviously there was that sort of big pack to begin with. I think he wanted to make the break. I mean, when you're one of the better riders in the group, you always want there to be less riders in the group because you can then use your skill a bit more to make the difference. Whereas when there's loads of people, there's people dive bombing, you get random people in there. When the pace is lower, you drag in some of the, not to be like disparaging, but the lesser riders that are not quite as fast can then get in, and they're pulling moves, and you can end up getting stuck. You always get behind a couple of those riders, your rivals get to the front, they pull away a little bit. So when you're one of the faster riders, one of the guys that's there week in, week out, you always want to try and make the break. And yeah, of course, that's what Colin decided to do. And yeah, unfortunately, he crashed it kind of just... We were watching some of the guys a little bit further back in the group that sort of cuts at his bike, is cartwheeling through the air because it was such a fast corner. I think he was a touch wide. I think that's why he crashed, because I think he just went to the dirty part of the track. Like you said, the front tucked, and at that higher speed, the bike just barrel rolls, chucks it, like sort of thing. The rear goes round, chucks him off, then it just absolutely goes tumbling up the road. Fortunately, Colin looked like he was relatively okay. Bike, definitely not so much, so that's going to be... Well, I was going to say a long night, but I don't know whether they'd actually bother rebuilding the bike before sending it off or what have you. I don't really know what the procedures are. Probably they would, so probably a long night for his mechanics, at least, though it is the first race of the day, so I suppose they've got a bit more time. But yeah, it was a shame for Colin. Again, looked like he had good pace this weekend. Looks like he has good pace every weekend, in fairness to him, and certainly not going to help his sort of bid for that second place in the championship. Of course, it's him, Holgado or Tola. That's the battle we're looking at really now, because Alonso's so far in front. In fact, Alonso can wrap it up next round now. So yeah, it's and it's quite... I think it's quite feasible that would occur. It's not an outside shot really. So yeah, I do feel like it's obviously not going to help his championship campaign in that aspect. But really, the most important thing is that obviously he got up and was okay.
Yeah, we did see lots of crashes all weekend where people were maybe 6-7 inches off the ideal race line. That was just enough just to go across that kind of treacherous trap of ending up on the the lighter colour track where there's just a bit of sand. People forget that it is an island, and in a lot of the shots you can see waves crashing off the rock. So just like in Qatar, and I suppose it was Argentina as well, a lot of sand can be dragged onto the track over time when it's not being used. So you end up with a very narrow race line. Now, you did mention he can wrap it up next time out. Do you know how many points he'd need to beat Holgado by to do it next time out?
Well, there was... Does he need to be 125 clear?
He does, which means he'd need pretty much a win and no score for Holgado. Near enough, really.
Okay, so yeah, it's not as likely as I thought it was then. But
yeah,
we did bet, didn't we, last time? Well, not bet, but we did say which rounds we thought it was going to be. I think I said Japan.
Yeah, so it is. We'll it's looking likely. Yeah, so, yeah, like it's done now, but like it could be official next time out. But if it's not, then it'll be official whenever we go at it, because like
he will win without turning up again. It's just what round that happens at.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just a matter of where he can do it now and stuff like that. So we might as well talk about his race. He had a very kind of modest race for his standards. Again, looking after his tyres in the pack, sitting third. He got past the fourth, straight back to third. I would say his timing is impeccable. Started the last lap in third position, makes the overtake up into P2 into turn 1, pulls a pass halfway through the lap, and then just bolts. And yeah, he is a bit special. To be honest, I might be rating him higher than Acosta in his Motor 3 class. He's been that good.
Oh, here we go. It's interesting.
I remember Acosta coming on scene, blowing everyone out of the water in his rookie year. But he went a bit quiet. He didn't do as well as, I know, Alonso's second year. Again, if Acosta went back into his second year, maybe. But I think this championship season is a lot better, just because I feel like Foggia came back against Acosta a couple of times. I don't know if you disagree or not, but I feel like Alonso's had everyone covered, and the only time we've seen any faults is when Alonso goes over his own limit, which is I suppose a kind of a thing he'll need to learn to pace himself, because I think at the moment there's no beating him, and I think the only one that can beat him is himself.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of was like, oh, interesting there, but I actually kind of agree, because Costa kind of choked, didn't he, really, at the end of his title-winning campaign. The pressure started to get to him, and he had a big lead, really, over Foggia, and he kind of whittled away at it, because Acosta was not finishing so well, and he's having... To be fair, he also had some bad luck. He got took out in some incidents that weren't his fault, but I remember he crashed at like Aragon, which was quite a crucial one. And then he kind of struggled. He kind of brought it back a bit at Portimao. Obviously, then Darren Binder did his job, and obviously ended that championship campaign. And as soon as that was over, really, Acosta was back to the Acosta we saw at the start of the season at Valencia. It was really good again. So it did kind of show that the pressure definitely got to him, and of course it would. He was like 16, and he was coming in first year in World Championship. In fact, was he probably 15th at the start of the season? I can't remember exactly now, but it was one of those things. The pressure was insane on him, and it's no wonder that he was struggling a little bit with that. But I think it put him in good stead for what happened. Obviously, what's been happening in his career after that. Obviously, the other title fights and stuff. So I do kind of agree, but again, maybe the fact that it's Alonso's second season does help. And he was in with an outside shot last year, wasn't he, come the end of the year, because his second half of the season was so good. So perhaps he has had a bit of that pressure before and stuff. But I think he's just so far in front, there is no pressure on him at this point. Like, you go into Iran, you're like 100 points in front of your rival. Like, there's no pressure really. You just kind of have to not get injured, pretty much, is the only thing you need to achieve, which is obviously a lot easier said than done. And he gave it his best shot to not do that on Friday. Didn't need to be fair. He was quite beaten up coming into this race, which kind of makes what he did even more impressive. He said he was struggling, said he didn't really actually have the pace. He said at one point he was just thinking, I'll sit back and take the points. But then he said, I don't know, he probably was trying to sort of get the crowd excited when he said this. He was kind of saying, well, here in Indonesia, for all the Indonesian fans and stuff, he wanted to put on a good race. So he then decided to go for it. But I think really he was always going to go for it. It's just a bit of something to say. Although I did notice this year there definitely was mentioned about like the fans so much more, which was good to see. I think there was some more in there. There was still some empty grandstands, but it did seem like there was probably a few more fans at the circuit this year. And the what they had in the Jakarta, or it wasn't in Jakarta, was it this time? I think Ducati had something in Jakarta, but there was an event pre-weekend as well, which looked like it was crazy. So yeah, it's good to see that the fans got some good involvement this weekend, which is an improvement over the previous times. But yeah, Alonso pretty much just did it looked like he struggled in the early stages, and like you said, he kind of engages into the gear on that last lap. He just knows what to do. They always say in Moto3, if you're not attacking, you're going to go backwards, and I feel like he just puts himself in a position where, starting the last lap, he has to make a couple of passes, and it stops anyone else being able to overtake him almost. And I think that's maybe what it is, the balance of it. But he probably just finds over the course of the race, he's like, okay, I can pass him there. So if I leave myself a couple of riders on the last lap, I'll be making overtakes all the time, so no one can overtake me. And yeah, I mean, how many wins is that this season now? Is it 10? 10 wins this season? I mean, it's absolutely incredible. It's a new record, isn't it? It beats Rossi's record, I think. So yeah, I mean, I could be wrong in saying that, but I'm fairly certain that's the case. The record for most wins in the lightweight class in a season. But of course, there is more races now, so those records are a little bit more asterisk-y than they used to be.
Yeah, you want to compare kind of probably win percentage, which is be more probably suited to that record. But still, nonetheless, he's going to win more races this year. So even if he has gotten the record, he's going to get his first title, as well as probably more race wins under his belt when we get to... I imagine he'll go to Valencia as champion, probably run a special helmet, and he'll absolutely disappear. So yeah, it'll be an interesting run-in for the rest of the season, Moto3, and I look forward to the races. But I think after Japan, we'll be looking at pretty much an exhibition for Alonso for the rest of the year. So now on to Moto2, the championship I am most invested in. I just feel like there's most going on at the moment, and another race weekend where a lot has happened. A lot of people have ruled themselves out of the championship, and some riders have stepped a little bit closer. Now, in the opening few laps, it was very messy. Turn 1, we had an incident with Messia and Zonta van der Hoorberg. We'll get to that later. I want to talk a bit about that. It's in my notes. It was just messy. We had Senna Aegis come off at turn 8. We saw Chantra and Aldeguer clash. We're going to start with Chantra and his poor right foot. Now, apparently, there is nothing broken, or he's not injured. He's been declared fit. But that is also why I don't trust social media that much, because Alex Lowes, who crashed today in the Super Bowl race, could barely understand what planet he was on when he got up, was declared fit almost immediately, then to go on to be declared unfit. Not for a head injury, he was declared unfit for a calf injury. But when he got up after taking a ZX10 to the head, he didn't know where he was, who he was, what he was doing. So I just take these social media posts, they've been declared fit. I still think that more than anything, he's declared that he hasn't broken anything, but we've seen before in Mandalika, in that very corner, Loris Baz and Alex Lowe's have coming together. It's a bit of an issue, and it's one of those things I wanted to raise. Are we in a situation where racetracks need to be maybe cleaned better before we get to stop these? Because it's either that or we somehow banned the leg dangling, because it was for me straight away watching it, the commentary team maybe thought it was a mechanical and that he was maybe just unhappy with it, but I could see straight away it was just like when Baz, his head was on the tank, you could tell he was just in pain, and that he kind of limped around with the pace car at the back, that there was something seriously wrong. But it looks like there's nothing broken. But do we need to address the bigger question? We need maybe better, cleaner tracks for future World Championship events.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose when the incident first happened, obviously, like you said, the comm teams probably didn't realise, but it's because Aegis was sort of crashing at the same time. So you saw kind of Chantra just going wide, and then Aegis just his bike sliding through. So I guess that's maybe how it was missed. I mean, yeah, I actually hadn't considered that it was because of the racing line. I just thought one odd coincidence that it happened at the same corner twice, but maybe that's why I'm not in I'm not a steward or race director or anything like that. I thought that was the same corner that happened to Bazab, but that was a bit weird. Yeah, that's probably to do with it, but yeah, obviously that is one thing to work on, and I think in fairness they have worked on it this year. Obviously there's still work to do, but based on what they were saying on like Friday and stuff like that, they have made some improvements. So they're making sure that the water that they're using is clean. It's not got salt or sand or anything like that in it to wash the track before the weekend. They're obviously trying to sort of maybe regularly wash it a little bit more. The tarmac seems to be in better condition now as well. Obviously, it was laid with I think bitumen from other countries rather than the local stones, because I don't think that was working as well. So I think they have improved track surface, because it definitely was better this year. But yeah, that's potentially one thing. I mean, I suppose that it does kind of beg into question is like we never really have understood the purpose of sticking the leg out. They just all seem to do it. That some people say it's better for stability. Some people just say they do it just because everybody else does it and stuff like that. So I don't know if there's really ever been sort of 100% proof, and I'm sure in GP they'd quite like them to not stick their legs out to ruin the aeroflow, so I'm sure they would be pretty happy for it to get banned. Just seems like, I always just think when they're doing it, it is just a risk, because if someone goes into your leg, it can happen at any corner, any time. It's risky, so I think it is just one of those things. I mean, sure, obviously there was the whole, does the racing line need to be wider? But there was people sort of all over the breadth of the track, and at the end of the day, it was still Aldeguer that went into Chantra. You could have done that at any track, so maybe it did play a factor. But yeah, I think ultimately we're just quite lucky that it doesn't seem to be as bad as the Loris Baz thing, which is good, because that was snapped. That was horrible. I did see a picture of Chantra on set of crutches, and his foot was all bandaged up, so it does seem to be particularly the foot, I think, rather than the leg. Doesn't seem to have snapped the leg like it did for Loris, which is good. But maybe at this point, a lot of swelling, stuff like that, maybe there could be a fracture underneath. Sometimes you can't tell, even with an X-ray, because there's so much swelling, it just covers everything up. So I'm sure they'll be checking that one. It's a couple of weeks now, so hopefully we'll be able to heal up. But yeah, upon like the second watch of it, it was very clear that clearly Chantra was in pain rather than mechanical. So it looked like our classic false neutral into a corner, which we've seen many, many times. But no, it certainly was an injury. Hopefully Chantra is all okay. And like you say, perhaps maybe there should be something done with the track surface, because obviously if the racing line is wider, probably less likely to happen. But I think in general, it's just always a risk they run when they stick the legs out. And I'm surprised, to be honest, it doesn't happen more, because you would expect it to, with the fact how close people ride these days and everybody sticking the legs out. I'm surprised that I've only ever seen this happen like twice. And it's also weird that it's the same corner, because even track conditions, it's weird that it's the actual same turn on the track as well.
I actually cast my mind back to the Mizan 2 move from Bastianini. I actually saw it happening there as well. Martin goes defensive 6 out his leg, and just before there's contact, the leg goes back onto his foot peg, and I just thought there, oh, that was close, like, because that could be his championship there if we have a collision there and the leg gets caught. For the doctor's dangle, as it was originally kind of named, if the big thing I understand it's for is to transfer load back. So when you throw your leg off, you kind of, suppose the motion of you going forward against the air pushes you further back into the seat and just puts more weight on the rear and heavy braking. Now, as years have gone by and everyone seems to do it, you'd wonder, how efficient is it with the aero, especially in GP, since we're talking about Grand Prix. Obviously, right now we're talking about Moto 2, but we did mention that in an ideal world, it would probably be best if maybe the Grand Prix level riders didn't do it, because it affects some of the downward ducks and stuff like that with the aero. So you'd wonder, is there something like that? Because Pecco, for example, doesn't seem to do it as much as I feel everyone else. I feel other riders do it more than Pecco, and I wonder, is it because he knows deep down that there's a benefit not to do it with the aero, and he's trying to use the aero more to do what he would do with his leg off. But yeah, it's an interesting one. There's no perfect solution for cleaning the tracks, because we go to most tracks and they do clean it, but what we need down is rubber. If you have a rubber race line, it's better, it's quicker, it's faster, it's easier to ride on, and we just need a wider racing line, which is one of those things where you only get that from bikes going around putting rubber down, and by the end of the race weekend usually is when the track's most rubbered in. So it's kind of one of those things where it's kind of it's a difficult ask to get rubber down. We know it was a couple of years ago where a Friday night, was this Argentina, where they let all like the hire cars on track to kind of get a bit of rubber down to like clean the track up. I can't remember if it was Qatar or Argentina or maybe even here, but I remember Jack Miller saying that they should do that pretty more often, just to put some sort of rubber down, just so it's not fresh green tarmac when they're racing. But it's one of those things, and again, thankfully, it looks like today Chantra escaped injury, massive injury in him, because we'll be soon going to his home race, so it would be a shame if he was to miss that due to injury. But it's one of those things, when it happens, it's just worth thinking maybe, is the leg dangle or the doctor's dangle becoming a thing that maybe we might need to look at and see, is it a danger to the sport? But it's a debate that could probably run on for a lot longer. So we'll move on to another rider who unfortunately has basically ended his championship in the same corner, and that is Jake Dixon. Now, Rhys, you being British, was there any real hope that you could see Dixon winning this before this crash today, or was it an outside chance like the rest of us felt? Because I personally felt like Igor has this one, not as much as Alonso, but I feel like Dixon is doing enough to stay there. But then when I saw today's incident and he crashed as well in Misano, I just felt like that was just a nail in the coffin today, just for him to really hand it over to Igor.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been an outside shot. I mean, when he went on those run of races where he's like the top scorer and he'd not been outside the points since France, and he'd won like 2 out of the last 3, and he was on the podium in the other one, and you can kind of see a run of momentum like that and think, what, he could catch this up. But I thought it was done after Misano, really. He kind of needed it to go perfectly to still have a chance, because, I mean, when you don't score in like the first 5 rounds of the season, that's already 5 DNFs effectively. I mean, if he didn't have that, he'd be in a great position right now. But yeah, it was kind of needless, because I don't know, I can't remember if we actually did mention it on the podcast now, it was a few weeks ago, but the first was all around. I think I don't know if I would have thought I would have done, I was thinking this anyway, I commended him for doing quite well, for coming through from 14th to 5th in that particular scenario and not making a mistake. Yeah, Misano 2, he qualifies well, and he crashes needlessly. And then he qualifies well here and he crashes needlessly. I don't understand. It's almost as if, like, when he qualifies well, he expects to perform well, but sometimes you just kind of have to accept the race is maybe not going your way just yet. And it was a strange race. I mean, look at Aldeguer throughout this race. He was here, there and everywhere, and he still almost got on the podium. So, first couple of laps maybe not quite going your way. Just keep calm. It'll come to you. You could still very well have finished second in that race. At that point, it was nowhere near out the question. No one was probably beating Canet today, to be fair. But lap 4, it was very early on in the race. He wasn't even that far behind, and down he goes. So yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the championship's absolutely gone for him. I mean, I kind of see it as Agoras to lose at this point, because he's got a healthy lead, like what about race wins worth now, and he's literally made one mistake all season, and it was in a free practice session. And yeah, obviously that could happen again, but it seems pretty unlikely when everybody else is all over the place, crashing here, there and everywhere, and having weird races and somehow letting people beat them on the run to the line despite leading into the last corner. When people do stuff like that, I don't see past Agora personally for the championship. But yeah, Dixon definitely out of it now. I thought he had a decent shot at a top 3 and probably being top Calex, but I think even that's gone now at this point, because Canet's obviously up there. Roberts obviously has continued not a great run of form, so maybe you could still beat him, but I haven't actually got the standings to hand. But 2 race crashes in a row, that's like 50 points down the drain. So yeah, he's probably falling back a little bit again now. He's probably around about like where Vietti is now, Manu Gonzalez, that kind of region. So yeah, I imagine a bit too far behind really to even get a top 3, which is a shame for him because I think he's rode quite well over the balance of the season. But last couple of rounds, as it tends to for Dixon, doesn't go well at the flyaways, and yeah, that seems to be continuing. Well, I know Misano's not a flyaway, but I guess technically it should have been India, so we'll pretend.
Yeah, he's actually never ever gone well at this track. He might remember back
he was
to
on pole and crashed, didn't he? That time before, I remember that.
So
Wasn't it the same turn actually?
Yeah, it was, and he was. It was one of those ones where everyone was like, "We don't know about the tires. We take a hand," and he crashed early. Everyone was like, kind of needless, like, because it's one of those races when you kind of crash early in a tire kind of war race where you need to kind of leave the race come to you. It's kind of it's probably one of the worst races to crash because everyone's kind of taking 95%, and like you should be able to ride at that. And when you crash at that, you're thinking, "Oh, that's just a lack of concentration. That just is not what you need." It's like, I don't like, for example, we'll just go for an A Bastianini today, absolutely riding the maximum he could do and fell off. You're on the limit. It's understandable when in a race where you know your race doesn't begin until you've 7 laps to go. If you're crashing 3 or 4 laps in, I know full tank of fuel, and again, I'm sitting in my chair saying how easy it is to do, but as a top level rider in the Grand Prix, it should be something he should be able to do. And it's a couple of times now, 3 times he's done it now, I believe, at Amanda Lika. So unfortunately, championship over for him. And I do agree as well. And I was just looking at the calendar there we were speaking. Second last race of the year is Sepang. Do you reckon? I'll tell you the gap actually at the moment. So 34 plus 8. So 42 points at the moment. Igora has over his teammate Sergio Garcia. Do you reckon it'll be done before or after Sepang?
Is that the championship lead, 42 points?
Yeah, it's much more than you expected, yeah.
What? Okay.
Garcia crashed today, remember now, and he was second.
Yeah.
So it's 20 years away. Like, so.
I thought it was still like about 20, but I think, that must have been before Garcia crashed. I thought it was after. So is Garcia still second then? I thought Canet had just moved up ahead of him now. But
Garcia is second by 10 points over Canet. Dixon's 7th now, would you believe? Yeah, Dixon is.
How far is he back?
78.
Yeah, that's basically back to where he was before he started his streak.
Aldeguer's 62. Like at the moment, Joe Roberts is like. I'd say Alonso Lopez would be the man I'd put second in the championship because I reckon Canet's going to like make some critical mistakes in these.
Canet will probably just.
Even though he won today, like, but it's just Canet, like so. But
yes, I think
what do you reckon for Igor to win it? Do you reckon before Sepang or in Sepang?
Yeah, because it's 42 points now. I only see him extending the gap further over the next couple of rounds because it's Japan next, right?
Yeah.
If
he doesn't win,
to be fair, we could see it decrease significantly at Japan if he goes really wants to win there.
Yeah, true.
I wouldn't put it past it this season. Him crashing trying to win. I think he'll either win or bin there. To be honest, that's my prediction. Bit bold maybe, but that's even though I said like 30 seconds ago,
Indonesia calendar, and put that into that little bucket of fun.
Yeah, he did last year, so he should have done this year. If they ran the race for like 24 hours, he might have caught back up. But anyway, no, I think he will do it before Malaysia because I can only see him extending the lead now. Garcia just seems to be pretty much done in the championship. Obviously, Canet, it's kind of been a bit hit and miss. Alonso Lopez is probably still within a chance of maybe second, like you say. He's been quite solid, actually, to be fair to him. We've probably slated him in the past being pretty up and down, but last third of the season that we've had, but he's been pretty much there week in, week out, to be fair to the guy. Aside from Masano 1 when he crashed, but he seems to have been pretty consistent. So Aldeguer did seem to be more back to his normal self, and I think could have finished second today without some weird things that happened to him. So I could see him going on a tear now till sort of the end of the year and scoring a lot of points and maybe doing exactly what he did last year, just sneaking into the top 3 positions on like the last round. So yeah, we'll see. But I think it's definitely Agoras to lose, and I think he will do it at what's the round before Chang? Is it Chang or is it Phillip Island?
Phillip Island is so we've Motogp, Phillip Island, Chang, Sepang, Valencia.
Oh yeah, Chang then. I think he'll do it at Chang.
Fair enough. Pretty good prediction. The main reason I just want to see will he go to Sepang needing to wrap it up, or will he go there with?
If Arbolino's as quick as he was today, I don't think he has to worry.
That's true, I suppose, right? Because to be fair, I feel like all the form riders at the moment are not championship riders. Like, for example, say not championship, I suppose there's very few. There's only kind of 2 championship riders left. One of them crashed.
There's one. There's one left, let's be honest.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah, exactly. Alonso, Lopez, I don't really see...
Yeah, all the guys that were on form previously, last few rounds, have like the last 2 races just dropped off. Like Vietti was nowhere today, Arbolino's nowhere today, Dixon crashed again. You know, like all the riders that had suddenly come to. The only one that really was that's been doing well the last few rounds and then suddenly hasn't disappeared is Canet, really, and we know he probably will suddenly disappear at some point.
He'll either crash or he'll shred a tire at some point in the remaining few races. Because again, to be honest, the fact. I suppose we probably could. Actually, I just want to talk about first about Zonta's penalty. So turn 1, small collision, big incident from Masia. Obviously went up over end, land on his head. Very painful, ugly looking crash. A double long lap, if my memory serves correctly. It's been about 77 hours since I watched the race, so I could be wrong. Was it a double long lap he got for Zonta or single? I believe.
I think it's double. I think I saw on Instagram he said it was a double. I think I saw his post saying that.
Did you also feel that was incredibly harsh for a turn 1 incident where the contact is minimal? Now, I understand they penalised for the outcome, not for the result. The collision wasn't penalised. It was what happened to Masia was what I feel like why they penalised him. But I feel Zonta's been very hard done there with that one. He's off the edge of it. He's hanging off the far side of the bike, and he just, again, turn 1, they drift into each other, and Masia comes off worse. We've seen a lot worse this year get single long lapped or even be overlooked. I thought that was just really... Of late, we haven't really probably talked too much about the stewards because we're kind of just waiting for Crafer and his crew to come in next year. But I felt like this one had to be talked about because I just felt it was such a bad decision. Am I in the minority with that, or do you agree?
When I first saw it in the notes, I thought it was a single long lap penalty. But I think, yes, a double is too harsh, but yeah, absolutely a single. He completely rode through him. So, yes, it's definitely a penalty for me. I think double was a bit harsh because I think normally it's a collision resulting in crash is a single, especially at turn 1. It's turn 1 of the race, but yeah, for me, just completely rode through Masia. So yeah, absolutely a penalty.
Yeah, no, the way you're saying he rode through him, my brain's like, whoa, that's not what we saw. So maybe when I first watched it, I missaw it, but I just felt like it just...
I mean, I could be wrong, but I felt like he just completely rode through. You know what Munoz did like last year?
Yeah.
Catalonia. It was kind of like the same thing, just basically rode through his body. Like, it's like GP bikes where you can't hit the guy, so you try to ride through the rider's body. Like, it's almost like he did that. Maybe he's been playing too much of it lately, I don't know. But I've not seen him online, but...
Yeah. I'm not going to open that little journal. For me, personally, I didn't think it was a penalty at all. Because from the inside, we'll say inside of the track shot, where you're looking through the apex to where the two riders are, Zonta's at a fair bit of lean. And it looks like he just kind of, as they both go like off the edge of the, like off the apex of the track, they both drift out. Small bit of contact, and it ends up being a bigger accident. I could be wrong. That's just from when I saw it at the time. That was my initial thoughts. Again, maybe if I watch it back, I could be wrong, and maybe he does just go straight through him, and that could be that. But let us know in the comments, either on the YouTube or on Spotify. You can leave us a comment. And I just personally felt that it was, again, even if he does kind of ride through him, I think the double long lap is maybe extreme, because he doesn't. It's not like I don't feel like he's outbroke himself and just ran into him. He's on the exit of the corner. They're powering out and then just contact. So it's a bit of a weird one. But I just felt like I wanted to mention it. But someone who
double is harsh, definitely. Double is definitely harsh. Double is definitely harsh.
Yeah. But again, whether it was a penalty or it was a single or what, I think that's where it's a bit of a grey area at the moment. And at the moment, I don't have the incident to hand in front of me, unfortunately, so I cannot review it again. But moving on to Canet, who bolted early. And I was watching the whole race going, how long before they start catching him? How long before he loses tyre? How long? I was watching the gap. And I was watching the gap, and the gap kept getting bigger. It got bigger, and it never came down. It was a masterclass from Canet. I would say he does these a couple of times a year. He doesn't. He does one of these every 5 years, and that's him done for the next 5 years. We're probably a bit harsh on Canet, but again, I think with most of these riders, if they have form for doing silly things, wearing out tyres, making silly mistakes, again, look at what he did last time out. I think they get stuck with me anyway as being a certain type of rider. I feel like Canet is I don't want to say not an intelligent rider, but he makes silly judgment calls at time. But today, absolutely hands down, he did everything right. Really surprising that he went that fast that early in a race that you'd imagine tyres were pretty pretty critical to save him, but somehow he managed to go faster. And yeah, he was absolutely stunning today. It's just a shame, really, that Canet doesn't do this more often, because deep down, there is a very good rider in there.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. Like, how many times have we seen him fastest all weekend, like in basically every practice, pole position, and then just like either just goes backwards in the race and then basically finishes like second or third, or like someone shadows him all race, or like and passes him right at the end, or he crashes, or he pulls away a little bit for a couple of seconds and just plummets because he runs out of tyre. We've seen that time and time again. But yeah, like you say, he was literally faultless today. It was absolutely perfect. If he rode like that every weekend, wouldn't matter how many tattoos he's got, right? Being MotoGP, like it's one of those things. If he did this every weekend, which obviously is a lot to ask, because we said, riders who just have really good weekends, you can't expect them to do it every weekend. But
if he did it 3-4 times a year.
Yeah, if he just did it more than once ever, like, probably. It's the first time he's done it in Moto2, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue, obviously, he dominated Portimao, but that was only really... He was running second in the early stages. Lopez crashed. Aldeguer got a double long lap for jump at the start, was all over the place, and was a bit of a strange race still early on with the Pirellis.
The gaps that grew around him were a bit artificial. It wasn't down to him doing today's sort of pace. Like.
Whereas today, he just pulled away. I mean, I was thinking the exact same thing, and I'm sure everybody else was thinking the same thing as well, because we've seen this time and time again. But to his credit, it was absolutely flawless. He pulled away from the start. It just didn't see anyone again. Didn't make a single mistake or race. Or maybe he missed an apex here or there that we didn't see on camera. Who knows? But it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, as far as we're concerned, it was absolutely faultless race. And I don't have a lot else to say about it. I'm happy for him, because it's good to see that he actually does have it in him, but it also just makes you frustrated, because it's like, if you can ride this well, why does he not do it more often, or why does he make so many mistakes? But yeah, I mean, clearly he had the pace from Friday, but we've seen that so many times before, and he's just not converted it. But this time, absolutely gone, just left everyone in the dust. And it's one of those weird tracks where that can happen. There's a lot of tracks where you can't pull away like that. This is obviously one of them where you probably can, because it just takes that special little bit. But clearly that Calyx underneath him was really on song today, and all credit to him. Really good race win, really well deserved as well. I think it's a shame almost in a way that this wasn't his first race win, because he obviously got the other one at Portimao, which there was a whole thing of like, oh, he's always the bridesmaid kind of thing. But if this was the way he'd won his first race, it really would have been sort of a message and stuff like that. But fair enough. Second career victory, second in the season. So I said last week he still rides like he's got the monkey on his back. Maybe he did feel in a way that he inherited it from Lopez almost psychologically, and thinks he hasn't bolted from a win and done it before. So now he's done that. I guess the only other way he needs to win now is actually in a scrap for it, and then he should be over all of it, you would hope. So yeah, we'll have to see how the rest of it goes on. Obviously, we've kind of alluded already that we think he won't be able to challenge for the championship. He's too far behind, and he'll probably make some sort of mistake anyway, which is likely to happen. But who knows? Maybe he'll build on it and perform well. I'm trying to think. I think he went quite well at Motogp a few years ago. I don't really know how well he goes at Chang or Malaysia or Phillip Island, honestly, but I seem to remember he's quite good at Valencia potentially. So maybe we could see another win or two from him, and yeah, it'd be good for him, because he's been in the class a long time, and he's clearly a good rider. Like, we've always known that, because you can't show that kind of pace in free practice and not be a good rider and qualifying and stuff. But never puts it together, and probably, I don't think it's unfair to say probably for the first time in his career, definitely the best ride of his career, 100%. Even Moto3 aside, which he had some quite good races in. I think he did something similar to this in Austin a few years ago in Moto3. But yeah, even still, it was a fantastic ride for Cadet today.
One thing I'm going to pose the question: what do you think for next year? Could he maybe be a man for the title?
I don't know. Who is going to be... I'm just trying to think who's going to still be around. Garcia's going to still be around, and I know he's dropped off as of late, but starting again... Yeah, Dixon. Yeah, Dixon, Roberts.
Garcia,
I can't see it for Roberts. Gonzalez.
They're right, that would be still in the championship, we'll say. Maybe not.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of... I mean, we could get a left field. I mean, no one would have predicted Garcia to be one of the main championship guys this year, so maybe you could see... Someone like Moreira, because Senna Aegis. In fact, actually, Senna Aegis is a good one, because I think he had quite a similar season to Garcia last year. Some good highlights where he's finished sort of decent top 10, perhaps almost in the top 5, and kind of been nowhere some of the weekends. Although I do remember now that I think about it, towards the end of last year, Garcia was kind of consistently in the top 10, so he clearly made a step. Yeah, so I think, but maybe someone like Cedar Aegis could be a good shout, actually, for someone that could make a bit of a step next season. Maybe Manu Gonzalez making another team move, but he's kind of going through them a little bit now and performing quite similar, so it kind of takes the question marks away a little bit from the teams, and maybe that's perhaps just his limit, or who knows. But yeah, it's tricky to say. I just kind of want to say no, because everything. I know this was such a good round, but one swallow doesn't make a summer or something. I don't know what the phrase is, but like one good result in your entire career doesn't make you also a championship contender again. So no, I kind of think no, but it depends on really how everybody else gets on next year, because we've also got someone like Arbolino. I'm sure he'll be bouncing back next year, being a bit better. Vietti on the speed up could be an interesting prospect. So is Alonso Lopez going to a different team as well? I don't know. I think he might be. So yeah, we could see some different things. An extra couple of Boscoscuros on the grid in the Yamaha team, actually, and in the Mark VDS. There's going to be 4 more Boscoscuros on the grid next year. So that could be a different package as well altogether with the extra data and stuff. So probably too early to tell, but kind of I'm leaning towards no, just based on everything I've seen in his career so far.
Yeah, and you couldn't. There's absolutely no argument that you were right or wrong with that, because what we have seen is that on his day, unbelievable rider, probably a bit like Maverick in a way, where he dominates the weekend, but just can't put a race together when he needs it. And I think that's always been his downfall. Speed has never been a question. Every track we go to, he's always pretty much top 7, top 8 minimum. So it'd be interesting to see. But again, just as you were kind of going through the riders there, I'm just thinking of riders that were more consistent, who if I was putting my money on, I wouldn't be going Canet straight away. Like, I'd put money on Dixon before him. I'd probably nearly put money on Joe Roberts before him. I'd definitely put money on Alonso Lopez before him. I'd put money on probably Manu Gonzalez to be consistently over a year to probably do it, because I think Canet, even though he'll be quick pretty much everywhere we go next year, he's going to have these races where he probably shreds a tire or crashes too often or stuff. Again, maybe wrong. Again, I would say like he's building, but I don't know if is he. I don't know if we can consider one absolute world class result to be building. But we'll see. I hope, because you never want to see a rider, I suppose, not perform to his level, because we all know that he is a really real good rider on his potential day, but it's just whether we can get that out of him. And you'd wonder maybe if he ever got into like an Akio team, would there be able to pull that rider same way he did with say Remy Gardner, where that rider was in there but maybe didn't show it regular, and then we managed to pull it out and get a season out of him. So maybe he just needs the right management around him. He's one of those riders that maybe his window is a little bit smaller and he needs a bit more work around him to get there. But I suppose we'll know pretty early next year whether he's made a step second year again with everyone on the Pirellis, and it looked like he's definitely benefited. He's won 2 races now this year on the Pirellis. He's probably crashed less, you'd say, probably out of good position, so he's probably had a decent issue. Now, of course, we're going to finish up with Sergio Garcia. Crashed today, a pretty fast one out onto the outside of the Mazzano curbs, as they're known. Qualified 15th, was in 10th. I don't even know what to say really about poor Sergio at this point. His season is just kind of petered out as we expected it. We didn't want it to happen, but it's I just have fears now that he'll go from what basically happened last year with Arbolino being a front runner, got handily beaten, and then just drifts into kind of mediocrity in the middle of the field. Is that what we think could happen?
I don't know, really. I mean, at least for Garcia, he can say he got injured. Arbolino just stopped being good. So there is that. And obviously, there's probably the lack of... It does all kind of build up on you. Obviously, he got injured, came back, probably hurt himself again in a crash. He does seem to have maybe got past the worst of that. Coming to some of these tricky tracks, he's struggling a little bit. He's got the pressure on him because Agora's pulling away. There's rumours that he's kind of having issues in his side of the garage as well. So, you know, if you've fallen out with the crew, that's always going to be a bit more tricky. And it does seem to just be spiraling for him. It does seem to happen. I feel like he's just got to make it to the end of the season, heal up completely over the winter, even though I'm sure he's mostly there now, but he's having a lot of accidents. He crashed in the last round as well, so I mean, that can't help. Having crashes probably potentially, hurting yourself a little bit more, even if you're not actually picking up a new injury. You just tweak yourself a little bit. You know what it's like. You get out of bed and you tweak your neck a bit funny. It's hurting for like 2 or 3 days. Imagine when you're crashing off a bike like at that speed. So it could be one of those things. He just needs to get to the end of the season. I think try and rebuild, come back next year. I think he will be strong again next season, because clearly he's got it in him. Especially going back to those tracks where early on in the season he perhaps did do pretty well. Although the first one is Thailand, so he might want to make sure he does well there in a couple of rounds' time, just to have that confidence. But some of those races, like Austin, for example, that he brought home the win and things like that, it's those tracks early on where he performed. I'm sure return to those will help him. But for this year, I think he's done now. It's going to take a miracle for him, some really poor misfortune for Iagora for it to turn now, and probably also for some of the other riders, although he is still second, so I suppose he would be the main one to benefit if something happened to Agora. But yeah, I can't see it now. I think it's done. I think it's just a matter of if, when, not if, and he's just got to try and focus on next season. I think a bit like the Arbolino thing, like, look, you've lost to Acosta now, come on, chin up, try and move on to next year. Clearly hasn't worked for Arbolino, but again, other issues aside with that, I think. So hopefully for Garcia, if he stays in the same team, perhaps if he does, as is rumoured, potentially takes the other side of the box, or whatever the issues are going on there could be sorted, getting over the fact he lost out on that MotoGP ride, and just go again and see if he can if he wins the Moto2 Championship, going to put him in good stead. Miller's contract's at the end of next year, so potentially could end up in that Pramac Yamaha after all if he manages to win the championship.
So as always, we will finish up with the MotoGP class, and probably realistically the only championship that is still actually open and up for debate, with Moto2, Moto3 pretty much already closed at this point. It was a terrible start to the weekend for Miguel Oliveira, another rider who just doesn't seem to have much luck when it comes to injury. A crash in Friday, broken wrist, and he was out for the rest of the weekend, so unfortunately he didn't make any of the races here in Mandalika. It's yet to be announced whether he'll be back next week in Motogp, so we wish him well, and hopefully we'll see him back.
Wasn't his fault either, the crash.
Yeah,
control failed apparently. So.
Twice that's happened to him now with 2 different manufacturers, so
yeah,
he is
one is unfortunate.
Some amount of ladders, shall we say, in his career. He's probably another rider that just needs to go in, reset, come back next year with Yamaha, and try and probably, it's going to sound hard, but rebuild his career, because from them Mandalika race win on the KTM in the rain a couple of years ago to where he's at now in his career, he's dropped off, and a lot of teams would probably think twice about maybe signing him up. I think he's a good rider probably to get maybe a development rider in, but I don't think he'll last too long Yamaha if the performances aren't there. But we're going to move on to the sprint now, and Jorge Martin is very wasteful. He was quickest all weekend. The only one that really was probably close to him in terms of outright speed on Friday would look to be his teammate, and maybe Bastianini. So was it a complete waste that he crashed, or was it kind of understandable that he was trying that much to make a gap in the sprint?
It's his MO, isn't it, in the sprint, really? He gets to the front, he tries to pull away, build a gap on the first couple of laps, just run that lap record pace, and try and that's how he wins the sprints. And he obviously just made a mistake on this occasion, entered the corner too fast. He claims he didn't do anything any different, and looking at the data, he didn't do anything any different. I mean, that's up for debate. Exactly, that's what they all say. I mean, at least he didn't say his bike was too good, but that's still the worst excuse I've ever heard. But yeah, that's the typical excuse. Well, the data looks like I did the exact same, or sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I entered with like 1 mile an hour more." It's like, well, that's why you crashed then. But according to Bagnaia, it looked like Martin was. Yeah, there's a bit of a weird kind of tiff almost between the two of those. Like Bagnaia said in the interview that he saw like Martin go into the corner and thought, "Wow, if you pull this down, you're going to win by like 4 seconds." And then obviously he crashed, and he's like, "Oh, then I know, didn't need to push." And Martin seemed to take kind of that like the wrong way. I don't know, maybe it was meant to be annoying to Martin. I didn't see it that way the way I saw it, and he was saying, "Well, that's the goal now, to try and win by 4 seconds." If he thinks if he's saying that, because Martin seemed to think he was entering the corner as expected. But yeah, it was a waste, a silly thing to do. I mean, it's easy done at this circuit. I mean, he crashed there literally in the practice session a couple of hours before, so you think he perhaps would have learned a little bit, and everybody was crashing there. It's a tricky corner, but again, another one of these title rivals crashing in a good position. It's worse. Like, I think I said this last week. Martin crashes out of the lead. Bagnaia crashes when it's not going well for him, and it just continues to go that way, as it seems. I mean, Martin again crashes out of the lead. To be fair, extra points for how quick he picked that bike up was ridiculous. But yeah, obviously wasn't able to come back into the points, so chucked away half of his championship lead there. And yeah, really on a weekend where he was clearly quicker than Bagnaia, as the race showed as well, he had the ability to sort of manage the pace. Perhaps should have just been a bit more cautious on the opening few laps through that corner, or just been cautious through that corner in the whole race. You know, make your time up elsewhere, make your time up where it's less risky. He had a decent gap already. It wasn't like Bagnaia was right on his rear wheel. He had maybe, was it half second, maybe something like that. He pulled the pin a bit anyway, and I think he would have continued to do so because I think Bagnaia sort of held up everybody else pretty much for the rest of that race, but it's just difficult to pass. So yeah, I mean, maybe Bagnaia backed off because he saw Martin crash, but was definitely a waste for Martin. But bonus points for picking the bike up so fast, and I think his sprint race time was about a second, maybe 2 seconds slower than the one that he won the year before with a crash. That's just shows. I thought it was a nice little stat. Just shows how much faster the races were this year.
Where do you reckon he would have finished if it happened in the main race? If he did the exact same thing in the main race and remounted that fast?
Oof, I don't know. I reckon he could have still won, you know.
I had a feeling, because I just feel with Martin, he has a bit of a chip on his shoulder, especially that kind of whole Pecco thing. Because Pecco kind of just made the commentators like, oh, he was going so fast that I wasn't surprised he crashed.
Yeah, it seemed weird to get annoyed by that. It just seemed like a basic observation to me. Like, oh yeah, I'm not surprised he crashed because he was going really fast into there. Like,
I feel like at the moment with Martin, something he lacks compared to especially Mark and Pecco's, that if someone says something about him or if something happens, he seems still to take everything very much to heart. Whereas I feel like if that was Pecco who made that mistake and Martin said something, he probably would have nearly agreed with him and said like, oh well, yeah, on the data it didn't look like that, but yeah, we obviously did something wrong to crash, kind of thing. Whereas Jorge Martin's like, oh well, the data said I did nothing wrong, and oh no, he seems to get all in a huff over it. No, like, obviously he crashed out and obviously wasn't best pleased after throwing away points, basically halving his championship lead again for Pecco to come back. Now obviously he recalibrated, came back on Sunday and did the job, but I just feel he just has, again, ever since I suppose the move to Aprilia and the whole snub by factory Ducati, he just has a chip on his shoulder, which to be fair you can't blame him. He's been a loyal rider to Ducati. He's been good enough for a couple of years now, and he's probably, like, there's still arguments he probably should have got the seat over Bastianini, and then he probably should have replaced Bastianini, not Mark. But I just feel like if we look at the crash yesterday, if we go back to Aragon, where Mark had the same situation where he was head and shoulders the fastest rider again, nobody really had his pace. There was a couple of riders that you go, right, if they could maybe get with him and ruffle his feathers and stuff, they might be able to do something. But look at what Marcus did. Marcus said he had another half a second pretty much every lap in the main race and the sprint in Aragon. I just feel sometimes with Martin, for some reason he feels he still has to prove himself. He doesn't realise that
Marquez did have like 0.8 a lap on him.
Okay, he had a bit more of an advantage.
Like he could like play it. He was on pole by 0.8, so
that's true.
I see what you mean,
but fair enough. The gap was smaller, but still a similar situation where like realistically nobody's touching him without some mechanical, or if he has a really bad opening lap. But I just feel sometimes Martin he still feels like that. He's probably trying to prove himself for why he should be on that factory Ducati, even though next year he's going to be on Aprilia, because I just feel like he could have won that race at the slowest race pace possible. That's just what you do. Like, it's really hard to overtake, even if Pecco.
That's what he did today. He clearly learned from it, didn't he?
Exactly.
So he clearly made a mistake yesterday, even though he said he didn't. Like
exactly, but like the worrying part is like how many years is he in GP now? Is this his 5th season? He should be learning from his mistakes now. Like, these mistakes should be long gone, and I'd say the same about Pecco. Like, you don't see Marquez, you would not see Marquez do this in my eyes, and that's why Marquez has 6 world titles in GP, and Martin is on his way to 1 maybe, but making mistakes like that, it's just, I know Pecco's going to make them as well, so you kind of think there's no way Jorge Martin can win a title the way he kind of makes these mistakes. But then you look at the guy he's racing against, and it's like looking in the mirror when it comes to their mistakes. It's ridiculous how many crashes and stuff. I think all year we've speculated, is this front end of this Ducati so bad? It's clearly with the air on the not amazing front tyres, they're very much near the limit, but fair enough being on the limit if you crash in the last lap battle, or if there's 4 laps to go, or like even somewhat understanding Pecco's one last week where he's trying to catch back up, he's pushing on. He apparently Pecco last week said that he broke 18 metres early when he crashed in Quartier Turn 8. Not too sure, to be honest. 18 metres is...
I don't get it when they say that, like stuff like that, right? They're like, I don't know why I crashed, I braked early. It's like, well, maybe that's why you crashed.
Yeah.
Like, I don't... Yeah, it always seems weird. It's like, how do you know 18 metres?
Yeah,
There's no way you're judging 18 metres. You could, like, say, oh, maybe about 20. Like you're not going to know exactly 18 metres, are you?
It's, yeah, it's weird. Again, when he crashed, I was kind of like, Jesus, why did you do that? Like, I'm very neutral. I try to be neutral. People probably disagree. People probably feel that I've maybe...
why do you hate Marc Marquez still?
Yeah, well, I'm neutral to 80% of it. To be fair, in these days, I'm very neutral. I don't really have any... I have a couple of riders I follow and like, but I wouldn't say I'm a such and such Pecco fan, Jorge Martin fan. I want good racing. I want entertainment on a Sunday is what I want. I respect all riders, so it just frustrates me when Martin could have cruised around and had a very boring sprint and extended his lead. And he didn't. He threw away points, and he's come away from Mandalika after losing points to Pecco when he should have done a perfect weekend, pole, fast lap, boat race wins. That's just kind of the whole point of it. But I suppose we can move on to the main race now, and I suppose Pecco, in a way, it was very fortunate to steal that sprint because, as you kind of said, he kind of just held everyone up. He really had nothing this weekend, really, did he?
He was lucky Marquez was behind him because Marquez couldn't pass him. I think that Bezecchi, but yeah, basically, it was lucky there was GP23s behind him because they couldn't pass him. Like, I think if you give Bastianini a lap or two more, he definitely would have done it. So he got lucky, but obviously he still also had to run a good race. To be fair to him, I always think, like, yes, he got lucky, but he did still have to defend from some really good riders behind him. So it's fair play.
Yeah, and moving on to the main race, Pecco's start. Span up, kind of jumped, did a bit of everything that you don't want on a start, and this is becoming an issue now for Pecco. His race starts, we've seen 5 in the last 8 have been poor. Right, you could probably rule out the ones in Aragon because of where he started. Also, make the point that he started on the same side this time here on the dirty part of the track. Also, Jorge Martin did. The only thing I'd say about Martin is he's further up the track, which means he was slightly closer to the racing line because the racing line will come back at him, so he's probably slightly in a better position. But yeah, what's going on with the starts? He used to be... Pecco's a weird one. He used to be unbelievable in qualifying. When he first came into the factory team, he was known for being the man who had so much over, we'll say, Fabio Quartararo. Looking back, Ducati versus Yamaha having so much is probably not a surprise, but he was absolutely amazing over the one lap. Then he seemed to have lost that. Then he was amazing at the starts, and now he seemed to have lost that as well. So it's a bit of a strange one for Pecco. It seems like he's just consistently having bad starts. Even his practice starts this weekend look poor.
It's weird, isn't it? Because, like, obviously, to start with, they just kept blaming the tyre, but then you get to the point where you can't keep doing that because it's pretty clear you're not getting a bad tyre every weekend. So I think it must just be the way they've got it set up. I don't think it's Pecco's fault because he's not an idiot. He's not going to just keep doing the same thing over and over again if it's not working. Well, maybe he kind of is to an extent because the bike should be sort of dealing with it for him, but I think it must be just the way they've got the electronics set up, because he did have some like incredible starts, but he gets incredible starts at like somewhere like Mugello. Like that track must probably get you that track probably gets used 365 days of the year. Like that track is so like it's used all the time. There's always something going on there. Super grippy. He starts there. He had that start. He had the penalty, didn't he, for getting in Alex Marquez's way? So he started like 4th. And he had an amazing start, sweeps like round the outside of like Martin as well, didn't he? And he took the lead like straight away. So, like we see races like that. I remember he got a pretty good start. Was it Catalunya as well? He had a quite a good start, I think, as well. We've seen him get these fantastic starts. It's almost like the tracks where they're like kind of normal. Like he doesn't have an issue. I mean, although Misano wasn't great either, so I don't know whether maybe they reacted to Aragon by changing the way things started and like the changing the start mapping or whatever, and that's not really worked there, so maybe they put it back to how it was before, and low grip here again kind of throws up the same issues as in Aragon. But like you say, we have seen this before where something he was previously a strength for him, he loses. I mean, remember last year when he like lost the braking strength that he had over everybody? Like there was a good few rounds where he just didn't have that and he didn't feel comfortable with the bike and he couldn't stop it. I just feel like maybe, I don't know, just it is so strange. Maybe they are struggling, maybe they're feeling the pressure and stuff like that, but you feel like if you had it working before, why is it suddenly not working now? And Martin used to be really good at starts, then sort of lost that a bit, but then seems to have it back again now. So I feel like maybe the starts are not down to the rider as much anymore, and it's very much down to how you have your electronics dialed in, and maybe those guys are just struggling. But surely, being in Ducati, you can just whack in Martin's settings and just go. But maybe the way he does the starts is a bit weird, and I know Martin uses a bit less traction control because he likes to have it in his hand. So maybe it's that. I don't know. I don't know how much traction control Pecco uses. I mean, he seems like a smooth rider, but if the traction control's good, you're probably going to use it and rely on it, and you learn to ride with it. So maybe use it on the start, but then maybe you could have a different mapping for the start, and then disengage it as you hit the brakes or whatever. I don't know, but it does seem it is an issue now, isn't it? And it's clearly an issue with, if not Pecco himself, at least his sort of package as a whole, so him and the team and the bike that's underneath him, rather than just the tyres, because you're not getting a Duff tyre every single round. Like if you start saying that, then it's definitely an excuse. A couple of times, once or twice a season, fair enough, it's going to happen. You probably are going to get a bit of a dodgy tyre, but as we saw in the main race today, he didn't really have it either. Although he didn't have it all weekend, he clearly was on the back foot all weekend, and I think he did good to get what he did. I think, to be honest, it wasn't a bad weekend for him, but yeah, the starts definitely becoming a problem for Bagnaia now. Well, they are a problem. It's not becoming. It's definitely an issue.
Yeah, I look back to the Misano races where he was clever in how he regained the lead in one of them, but it was it just shows that the immediate dump of the clutch that first few yards, he's completely throwing away time at the moment, and it's a bit of an issue. But in the main race, Martin controlled it lovely. He did exactly what he should have done on Saturday. The only thing that was kind of hanging over him was obviously the crash yesterday, but we all kind of felt like they probably wouldn't make that mistake. The only thing we were kind of worried about, maybe half race distance on, would the ghosts of last year come back to kind of haunt him, where he had a nice lead, but I think deep down he knew that Acosta would pull him in. Acosta would take maybe 3 tenths out of him, and then the next lap Martin would take 4 tenths back, and it's like you make 1 step forward, you lose 2 steps overall. So it was really, really good control again from Jorge Martin. He did the perfect race, but I just feel like that he probably if I was him, I probably wouldn't leave this weekend happy, even though he's won a race. It's just because he was so dominant. He should have come away to 2 wins, but in the main race, really, there's not much really to say about him. He led comfortably, managed it, kept Acosta at every moment at arm's length, and really there was no real fear, was there? Towards the end, he pulled even bigger gap when Acosta kind of accepted he wasn't going to pass the GP24 rider. But were you worried halfway through the race that we might see a characteristic slip up from Martin?
Yeah, well, you kind of always have to worry that with either of them, I think.
That's very true.
When they're out front. We've even seen Bagnaia on the last lap crash after the lead. I mean, it was a sprint race, but even still, you cannot be, until they have stepped, well, to be honest, until they step to the top step of the podium, you don't know if they've won, because there's track limits and tyre pressures and stuff these days. So, I know you can't set that with anyone, but you can be pretty certain that some riders haven't made mistakes. Like when you see Marcus cross the line in the lead, he's won the race. He's not going to have done anything. But yeah, it's one of those things. You are just a bit worried about potentially those guys crashing. But Martin himself said basically that entire race he had in his head, don't crash like last year kind of thing. And yeah, I think once he started stabilising that gap and keeping it constant to Acosta, it was clear he was just controlling it. It wasn't on the limit, so it was fairly safe. And I think the fact that he could probably see that Bagnaia was a bit further back, it wasn't the end of it. I think also it's good for him now to get the monkey off his back, because he hadn't won a long race since Le Mans. It's a long time ago. And I think that's played into some of the issues we've had. I think that played into Misano when he pitted, because I think he was so desperate to win a main race that he just went for the gamble. I think that played into his annoyance in how he lost the other Misano race with the contact and the last lap pass. I think that maybe it's played in some of his sprint races, thinking, right, I need to absolutely dominate this sprint race here so that I know for a fact that I'm the quickest and I'm going to be able to win the main race. So I think maybe we will see a bit more of a measured Martin now he's got that under his belt again. Maybe, I was going to say a bit more confident, but the guy's not lacking in confidence, is he? I don't think that's I don't think that's something he needs to worry about. But yeah, it was a perfect race for him. Pretty much he couldn't have done anything better, did he? He took the lead. Well, didn't take the lead. He kept the lead from pole the entire race. Managed it to Acosta, which I'm sure was a bit of a surprise to him. See, he was the main guy chasing him down, but And we've seen in the past that people have perhaps bottled it under the pressure of Acosta, or Acosta's kind of been there and caused some issues. But yeah, he pulled a gap initially, got reeled in a bit. Then once it got below a second, he made sure it stayed around 7/10 at the minimum, so that he couldn't be within range to get the slipstream and maybe do a dive bomb. And obviously also you have to remember that if someone's too close, they could make a mistake and wipe you out, whereas if they're about a second behind, they're not going to do that. So yeah, controlled the race really, really well, back on the top step. You say he's not going to be happy going away from it, or that he shouldn't be happy, but I think he's achieved kind of what he needed to. Yes, he has lost 3 points overall, you look at it that way, but that's also a round down now, and it's a very similar level of lead. He's finally won a main race again. He's over the demons of Mandalika from last year. Yeah, obviously it was a waste really to chuck away that sprint race, because he could be really having a solid championship lead if he had 12 more points right now. If he had 12 more and Pecco had 2 less, what would the lead be? Like 30 odd points? Like, it'd be crazy. So yeah, it would be over a race win's worth, be getting on for a whole weekend's worth of points, which would be really, really comfortable. And yeah, so he's going to be a bit disappointed for that, but I think generally he's got out the weekend what he kind of wanted to get out of it. You know, he's got a main race win back. Even though, yeah, he crashed in the sprint, he's still on the lead foot, because he's like, okay, I was quicker, hands down, the Pecco this weekend. So I think he'll take the positives out of it. He seems to be a lot better at doing that this year, at sort of putting a positive spin on it. I mean, I think he even put the positive spin on yesterday that at least he passed a lot of people, so if he needed to do that, he'd have a bit more experience with it. So yeah, you see that's definitely to be a step for him this year. He's kind of taking the positives out of these bad races, whereas last year it's a bit like, oh no, I crashed, and yeah, then going to pot the next race and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess we'll roll on to the next race now, and we'll see how if he continues that momentum, or if Pecco will strike back. Pecco, obviously on paper, looks good at Motogp, but Martin, I think, did the double there last year, so we'll have to see. Yeah,
and of course we could get a bit of rain. Obviously, remember the very surprising wet race we had last year where Jorge Martin won in the rain. We wouldn't consider him particularly a wet weather specialist, but he was really strong that day. Now, someone we've mentioned there briefly was Acosta P2. We've already talked at the head of this podcast about KTM's change of management. Was it a surprise that we go to low grip track that's a bit dirty and a bit kind of a bit rogue, and Acosta and KTM Gas are at the front?
No, and you say it on paper, no, it's not a massive surprise, because if you look back at Aragon, the last time we went to May, he was back on the podium there, and he was looking good. But when you look at, like, Marquez wasn't really quite there this weekend with it. I mean, the GP23 was close. I mean, Bezzecchi, for example, was quite good. I know I'm talking about Bezzecchi instead of Acosta here, but like, it clearly wasn't as much of a leveler as it was at Aragon. The GP24 still seemed to be the best bike, so I think that kind of drums home how good of a ride it was for Acosta, because the other KTMs weren't really anywhere either, whereas at least in Aragon, Binder wasn't doing too badly. He was there or thereabouts. Wasn't obviously on the level of Acosta, but frankly, he's not as a rider on the level of Acosta, which I don't think is unfair to say. Maybe I'll get shouted at by people for saying that, but I mean, just look at the results this year, look at the championship standings if you really, really want to. So Acosta obviously just really was fantastic today. You get to one of these circuits where the rider can make the difference more with that grip difference. It does help, but I don't think that was all of it. It did seem like he was just... In the sprint, he didn't really have a lot, whereas in the main race, he did. He was running second. He was comfortably ahead. I think he would have got mullered by Bastianini, had Bastianini not crashed, of course, but you never know. He might have ended up winning the race because of that. You never know what would have happened up front. So, yeah, it was another good weekend from him. Again, just showing he is the top KTM rider, because there's been, 5 KTM main race or 4 KTM main race podiums this year, and he's took all of them except one, which Binder took the other one. So, yeah, clearly has been hands down the best rider. Jack Miller, what did he do today? He took out half the grid at like turn 3. So there you go. That's what he was doing. Augusto Fernandez was right at the back, battling with Alex Rins until they retired. And Brad Binder qualified about 17th and slowly made his way up through the pack, but was beaten by a Yamaha and was battling with Zarco. So, it's head and shoulders. He was absolutely nowhere near him either. So it was such a good weekend from Acosta. When you compare this to what was happening a few rounds ago at Austria, for example, and we were like, oh, Acosta's really off the boil here. His season had gone down the drain, but they seem to have got the old settings back in the bike. They'd found something even better today, apparently, and he just seems to be back up there again. So, I don't know, it does show that the KTM's not a million miles off. When you take a bit of grip away from the Ducati, put a good rider on it, it can be up there. Well, okay, it's a bit flippant say good rider, a very, very fantastic rider, of course. On it, he can be up there, and he should be very happy. Glad to see that he didn't exceed the tyre wear thing, the tyre pressure sort of settings, because that was a bit of a shock when that came up. You're thinking, oh no, Pedro, because he had such a good race. But fortunately, he obviously was within the limits, which is good to see. And yeah, definitely the golden boy as for KTM. And yeah, Brad Binder definitely going to be the number 2 rider, I think, in the factory team next year, because just, yeah, Acosta's just kind of cementing that performance. Going to be interesting between those two actually in the points race, I think, because it's very close. But yeah, I think if the flyaways are anything to go by, which is pretty much all we've got left aside from Valencia, I think Acosta is going to be able to keep that one ahead of Brad.
Yeah, it's no question that Binder has his work cut out for not only the rest of this year, but of course for 2025 with the young Spanish superstar coming into the factory team. I suppose we've had a good weekend for the Japanese riders too. We'll finish up talking about the VR46 boys, more about the actual academy more than the team, but have to give a shout out to Zarco and Fabio, the main 2 riders. I feel Marini had a good weekend too, but it was skewed by the fact he got a couple of yellow flags in Q1. He was it 12th on Friday, only like 0.6 something off. It was a really good weekend, and again it shows, just like Bud last year in India, where go to a track a bit dirty, a bit not used regularly, and low grip, and the Honda seems to work. It shows that deep down the Honda has good mechanical grip, and it can generate grip and just performance when there's low grip. It just shows that it's not the worst bike out there. Well, it's not. It probably is, but it's not.
Well, it is.
It's a worst bike out there, but it's not mechanically bad. It's Honda haven't lost their way. They're just lacking in a couple of areas that really make it obvious. But what did you make of the Japanese teams this weekend, especially Yamaha and Honda's main 2 riders of the French boys?
Yeah, I was going to say the 2 French guys did well, to be fair. Zarco, yeah, kind of picked away left off in Aragon, was really good there. He got through his Q2 there, didn't he? Qualified well. Unfortunately, wasn't able to make much of the race, and you know, it was a bit of a shame, but ECs picked up there, similar kind of conditions, I guess. I think a bit more grip. In general, Honda made a bit of a corner. I can't remember if we did mention it last week, but they were much better at Misano. Mir was 11th, I think Marini was 12th. I think Zarco might have been 13th, which doesn't sound like a lot on paper, but it wasn't exactly an attritional race. It wasn't loads of people going down, so it was a good result to be just on the fringe of the top 10. You know, they were beating the KTM, the lower KTM riders. I mean, they're beating Augusto Fernandez most weekends now, which is kind of a shame for him. They beat Miller as well, which, you know, Miller wasn't having it was obviously a terrible race to be beat by the Hondas, but it wasn't like he had a tyre issue or anything like that, I don't think. He seemed like a genuine just pace difference, which isn't good for Miller, but obviously very good for the Honda riders. And yeah, I mean, Zarco had a really good weekend. He made more of the races this time. Now, of course, the main race, there was loads of crashes, so I actually feel a little bit sorry for him in a way, because his result looks not as good as it was because of the amount of crashes, because he would have finished in a similar position. He didn't benefit a massive amount from them. A lot of them were behind, but when you look and see there was like 14 finishes and Zarco finished 9th, then you're like, well, yeah, of course he did. It kind of makes sense. Whereas actually he was genuinely a top 10 pace this weekend. And obviously the other Frenchman, Fabio Quartararo on the Yamaha as well. 3 times now, he's gone directly through his Q2, which I think is, you know, something that's worth saying, because it's not like the Yamaha is good in qualifying, really. It's that's been its weakest area for the last, even 2022, when he could still kind of pull it to a good race result. He didn't qualify well, he had to get a good start and stuff like that, but unfortunately he didn't make the most of the races, whereas in Misano he definitely did, and was on course for a top 5 genuinely on pace until he ran out of fuel. This weekend he had the pace, I think, again to be in the top 5. I know we made the joke about the podium prediction earlier. That was obviously a little bit over ambitious, but he had good pace. I think he said he had the same sort of pace as Bezecchi, who finished quite well. So, but he just lost a lot of time in the opening couple of laps with the tyre, getting the tyres up to temperature. He dropped actually quite far behind Zarco, ended up coming through past Zarco, past Rafa Fernandez. Was catching up to the back of Maverick Vinales as well. He had to pass Binder as well, which again isn't a good look for Binder particularly, that he was battling down there with Quartararo and Zarco. But yeah, I think it's like you say, last year you got to somewhere like Bud where there wasn't much data. I don't know why I said data so weird then.
Data.
There wasn't much data that... Yeah, data. I don't know why I said it like that, but yeah, there wasn't much data at Bud last year. Obviously, here at Mandalika, again, there's not a massive amount, especially if track conditions change quite a bit year to year. Obviously, the first year, the main race is a washout, so there is that as well. So it's only 1 year of actual main race dry data, so it could help them. But even in Misano, they seem to have made a step, and maybe that's a sign of the concession show. Maybe it's also a sign that if you keep running and running and running and running at a track, maybe they do finally get there, they find a good setting, but typically with Yamaha especially, it's actually the other way. They usually peak in FP1, so yeah, it's good to see that they are actually... You're seeing them on the screen now. You're seeing them in the background. You're seeing them on the grid. You know, you can see them on the first lap. You don't have to keep looking really far down for them on the timing pages. You're seeing people, you know, them rubbing fair into people, and yeah, I hope that it could continue. We've got obviously next it's Japan, which is going to be a big race for both of them. I remember last year they were better there, I think, both of those manufacturers too, which you would probably expect. So, yeah, we'll have to see.
Yeah, and it is good to see them back there again. The sport is always better with for example, Repsol being up there, and with the Castrol LCR team. Of course, seeing Yamaha just in general is nice to see. It's funny, you go back 10 years ago and it was Repsol versus Yamaha every week, so you're thinking, oh my god, I'm sick of this. And now you're like, oh, it's nice to see the old Yamahas and the Hondas and stuff. So it won't be long now before we'll be saying, oh, wasn't it great to see Ducati in the top 8 after them dominating for all them years? It's great to see them back up there. Kind of like how it's like McLaren now in F1, where it's like, oh, it's great seeing them back after some years out. It's top level sport is so difficult. But we're going to finish up with the Academy VR46 battles. In the main race, they had a good go at each other, the two GP24s and the GP23. Massive shout out to Bezzecchi for crashing, picking the bike up, and then sitting his fastest lap of the weekend immediately in the last corner. Really, really well done. It's one of those things where surely you would think that you'd have to pick up the bike, do a lap, just make sure your levers are there. But no, he got up in the penultimate corner, he crashed, does the last lap, and sets his fastest lap in qualifying. It was a pretty cool stat just to see that he had slid off. He said he had lost a bit of concentration, but it was just something I wanted to point out. It was a pretty interesting one. But wasn't it? It was just, again, it's cool to see Frankie, Pecco, and Marco Bezzecchi just battling it out, and again, a pretty clean battle. And it's one of these days, one of them is going to collide with the other. I just feel like it's going to happen because Bezzecchi, I think, and
nearly happened, didn't it?
Yeah, a couple of
the
times
sprint
happened. But I feel like Bezzecchi and Frankie are pretty balanced at the moment. The much more experienced Bezzecchi on the older bike, and the lesser experienced and kind of refining his form Frankie on the better bike. They seem to kind of find each other in races a bit more often, but I think Pecco really in the end had them covered quite comfortably.
Yeah, it was. It's interesting to see those guys battle because you don't see it too much. I mean, last year we saw Bezzecchi and Bagnaia a few times going at it, which was obviously interesting. But Bezzecchi has had a terrible season. It's been a write-off, really. It's been absolutely appalling. I mean, I don't think it's also his own fault particularly, because obviously the bike just is not working with the tyre. But he's clearly out of the 4 riders struggling with the most and not being able to cope with it as much. But again, you bring lack of grip, and it seemed to kind of bring him back into it, which was good to see. Morbidelli was having a pretty good weekend as well, because even from Friday, he topped the first session on Friday, I think, and yeah, he was basically right up there, which is good to see because he had a really good Misano 1, and he unfortunately crashed out of a podium position, but he had good pace. But Misano 2 is nowhere. He had no pace at all, which was a shock, bit of a surprise. So he's kind of been hit and miss. He's had a few good weekends. I don't think it's really... He's definitely not done that bike justice so far, but this was one of those weekends where, yeah, he was doing a pretty decent job, to be fair, Morbidelli. So, yeah, seeing the 3 of them go at it was obviously interesting, and to be honest, for me, the highlight really was just seeing those guys back towards the front a little bit more, Bezzecchi and Morbidelli, because they are good riders, and they've been struggling a lot this year, so see them up there and battling with their mate Pecco as well is always interesting, but it was one of those things. It wasn't that much of a battle just because it's so difficult to pass, and again, even for the GP23, it was closer, but like I kind of alluded to earlier with Bagnaia being almost lucky in the sprint having Marquez and Bezzecchi behind him, the GP23 still is very difficult to pass the GP24, and I think we saw that really. Basically, Morbidelli was just holding them all up. Bagnaia was struggling for a while. Obviously, it's hard to pass a rider when there's a rider so close in front as well. So when you're in a pack of 3 like that, it's really difficult as the third guy to make the pass. Whereas when you're the second guy, you've got to focus obviously on not getting passed from behind, but you only have to clear one bike. Whereas when you're trying to make a pass on the second guy, you've got to try and clear that bike, but you've also not got to hit the one in front, so you've either got to try and just slide your way in, or maybe hope that the second guy makes a bit of a mistake or drops back and gives you a gap, or you've got to try and pass two at once, which is just not happening. So yeah, it was a tricky situation Bagnaia found himself in. So once he found his way past Bezzecchi, he found his way past Morbidelli pretty quickly as well, and at that point I think Morbidelli was struggling, but yeah, good little battle between the VR46 guys, and yeah, to be honest, good just to see Morbidelli and Bezzecchi finally performing again, especially in the sprint race with Bezzecchi. He was really, really looking on song, because we had Mazzano, those guys were on the front row, and you thought, this is it, they're back, but they just went nowhere in the race. And it's actually worth noting, I think Bezzecchi, his front ride height device didn't engage on the start of the main race, so yeah, even better probably to actually be fighting up with the front guys and having that issue. Fortunately, I think he didn't lose too much time, but he probably could have got an even better start if that had engaged properly. It definitely looked like it wasn't all the way down.
Yeah, it's always cool to see the legacy of Valentino when the three of them or two of them are battling at the front. It just shows their pathway, where they all started and where they are now. It's quite cool to see the progression. But finish up this one, it was a bit of a race of attrition really, and I just want to go into the kind of the detail of how many riders crashed out. We saw a massive engine failure for Marquez. Now, if you haven't seen it, watch the onboard. You can vividly hear it lock and seize, and Marquez gets thrown forward as well as it in. Obviously, oil is clearly after escaping its poor little engine, and it starts going up in flames. But the onboard camera is just it's actually ridiculous how aggressive the engine fails, and it's a proper rod out through the block situation, not one of these, it was electrical error. And
it's an electrical problem. What do you mean? Yeah, clearly it was electrical.
Clearly electrical when there's oil coming out the side cable. But I just felt all weekend it was just one of those attritional ones that I felt like we got in India last year, and I feel like going forward we might get it. And yeah, that'll probably sum up the championship really, is who can battle through these tough races and come out on top. But before we move on to Japan race predictions for Motegi, what do you think, who will be where and what will be when?
Oh, it's going to be tough because it depends very much on the weather. I think it sounds like it's going to be dry, so we'll see. I could be completely wrong. Probably going to be a complete washout all weekend now I've said that. But
it would be nice if we got a wet race to spice up the little run-in we have with Pecco and Martin.
Yeah. So just basically make them fight for second and third when Marquez is miles out in front, you mean? No, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to try and base it on a dry race. I feel like, just based on the pace they had there last year, I think it might be another Martin double potentially, with Bagnaia close behind. I think Bastianini maybe. In fact, you know what? It's going to be GP24 dominations. I think it's going to be those three on the podium. So I think it's going to be Martin, Bezzecchi, not Bezzecchi, unless he's getting a bike upgrade all of a sudden. Martin, Bastianini, and Bagnaia, I think are going to be on the podium. I'm not sure which order, but I think it's going to be Martin, Bagnaia, then Bastianini behind them, and then we'll see what happens with the rest. Probably Marquez trying to fight with the Costa potentially, and maybe the Japanese guys then behind that. But that's my prediction. I'll pass the same thing to you because I don't want to be the only one that looks stupid next week when when that doesn't happen.
For the sprint, I'm going to go Jorge Martin, Pecco, Marc Marquez, and for the main race, Pecco, Martin, Bastianini. I think that's pretty much what the form would say, and that's probably the safe bet really. That's kind of probably the boring.
Yeah, it's quite safe.
So that's just probably
exactly what I said pretty much, so I can't really complain.
Yeah. I just stuck my neck out a bit more and tried to predict each race.
You just thought, you know what, Bastianini is rubbish in the sprints, he's not getting on the podium.
Unless he starts on the front row, and even then you're thinking, geez, will we be able to sort his stuff out by half race distance? You don't know. So yeah, it shows again he's crashed today trying to recover so much after not leaving himself enough time to get back and win. And probably could have won the race today, should have won the race yesterday. Probably his story of the season really is just maybe he should have been there, he
should have turned up 15 laps ago. That's
exactly
usually
it's his typical trade-off. But I suppose that is where we'll leave it. We'll be back, of course, next week for Motegi, a very interesting track where we might get some weather. So thank you for tuning in. If you are listening on Spotify, if you could rate us 5 stars, it really helps us out with the overall kind of reception of the Spotify channel. But thank you all for watching. Hope you have enjoyed. We'll see you in a week's time for Motegi. Bye bye.